fortunate that there's a venue for them to compete. Brazil will be hosting the games in 2016.
Oh, there'd be so much excitement amongst that team. Not just for tonight, but knowing that you're the next host country. It's pretty special.
Oh, it really is. And you start seeing that ramp up as well, because there is a much bigger investment that comes from each country as they're going to be the host country. They don't want to host and have all the other countries take the medals out of their country.
Absolutely
They
not.
want to keep a bunch of those medals there. So you're starting to see that investment. You will see that investment coming from the Brazilians here. We expect some great results from them. They look like they're having a pretty good time too.
Fantastic. Every Brazilian I've ever met has known how to have a good time.
I think it comes naturally, exactly.
Absolutely.
We do see a little face paint there. We're talking tattoos. That might be a little bit more than a tattoo.
It's extreme.
They have a contingent of 270 athletes.
Still
which
far
is
off the biggest, though, isn't it?
It's far off the biggest, but it's right around the same as Australia. Australia with 276, which Australia obviously is a country that has made a huge investment in the Paralympics and has a really, really very successful athletes. My Portuguese isn't so good, so I'm not exactly sure what they're saying.
You can get the gist of it, though.
I think so. I think so. Some of that sounded distinctly like Brazil, which I think that they might be saying. There is a tremendous amount of pride associated with putting on your country's colors. Sometimes the scarves might be needed here. It has been a little bit chilly. It can be chilly on occasion during the summer months here in London. It's been warm and it's been chilly while we've been here. While I've been here for about 3 days so far. So
Monday was absolutely beautiful.
It was spectacular.
Actually, yesterday was very nice as well. But today, when that rain hit this afternoon, it really dropped down in temperature.
Did, and I think it's going to be chilly for a couple of days, but it's supposed to be a heat wave coming in next weekend. So we'll see what that brings. And another thing that the athletes have to deal with is just the variable conditions as far as the weather is concerned. Is it going to be warm? Is it going to be cold? Is it going to be wet? Is it going to be dry? And
Did you have a preference for weather when you were racing?
Did I have a preference? Yes.
Did you kind of like it when it was a bit cold and wet because other people would, get a bit more nervous so you could take the advantage? Or
the funny thing is that I never ran very well in the rain, but my only summer medal was in the 200 meters in Sydney, and it was pouring down rain.
There you have it.
So sometimes you just really don't know.
Yep. But I mean, I guess, too hot is never good, regardless, really, isn't it? It's,
The way that I've always looked at weather conditions is that you really have to love the weather conditions that are presented to you.
Yep.
And so it's hot. You think, I love it when it's hot, and hope that my competitors really don't love it when it's hot.
Does it have much of an impact, though, on how fast the track will run for you?
The track can get a little bit softer when it gets warmer. There are definitely times that that's the case. I think that this track is smoking fast. As a Paralympian, I always watched the Olympics, and I was really happy to hear that the 5 and 10K runners were complaining of shin splints at the Olympics, because that meant that it was a really hard track.
Yep.
And so for the wheelchair,
Yep.
exactly. For a wheelchair athlete, it meant that it was going to be really fast. And we've got Burundi coming in here. It is a bit of a perma-grin kind of thing when you come into this. It's sort of like you finish the opening ceremonies and go, "Wow, my face hurts," because I've been smiling so much the whole time
for a couple of hours.
Because it is so exciting.
So is Cambodia, the Cambodian team on our screen. Feels like we're whipping through it all very quickly.
We are. Well, when you have 4,200 athletes, you've got to make sure to get them in as quickly as possible. It's great to see some of the traditional dress as well. That's one of the great parts about being in the Paralympics, like being in the Olympics, where it's a cultural experience. And the cultural experience means that you end up having friends all over the world, people with whom you are competing. You get to sample a little bit, and you get to know somebody who's from a totally distant place that you might not ever visit in your life, but you feel like you visited as a result of getting to know this individual. This is a country that I've visited a couple of times. Been to Canada a bunch.
I was going to say more than a couple.
They have always a strong Paralympic team. It's funny, I just saw an old American who's now coaching their rugby team, Kevin Orr, right there, who's in my very first road race ever, and he was considerably faster than I was. I think he took his gloves off, took a drink of water, and I still never saw him.
So around 260 athletes.
262 athletes for the Canadians. So they're in and around that size of Brazil and Australia. The maple leaf being really distinctive. Obviously, Canada hosted the games in Vancouver. So the most recent Paralympic Games were in Vancouver in 2010. Those were the Winter Games. And you will get some athletes who will carry over. Just have a bit of a soft spot for some of those athletes. I think we'll see some of them later.
Yeah, it's a pretty quick turnaround, and you'd know this from your experience, but when you only have 2 years between games, so of course many people will just stick to either summer or winter disciplines, but we do see some athletes. It's been a rarity, but it does seem to be this time around. There's a number of athletes that have competed in Vancouver 2010 and are now here in London competing in a different event. It doesn't give you much time to recover mentally as well as switch on physically to a completely different event.
No, it doesn't at all. And the thing is that generally, I remember when I was skiing and I was racing wheelchairs, it meant that it was a world championship year and a Paralympic year in the same year.
Sure.
So it made it a really, really big year. But I felt like it complemented, the wheelchair racing complemented my skiing, much more so than my skiing complemented the wheelchair racing, because I was going into the season really fit as a result of my wheelchair racing season. And some of the athletes will do complementary sports. You'll have some wheelchair racers and some Nordic skiers. You'll have some cyclists and some Nordic skiers. You'll have some, cyclists and some alpine skiers who are sort of similar to what I was doing. And it all makes it interesting. I think it's a harkening back in some ways to the way that the sport was, but it is getting to the point where it's so specialized that you don't have the luxury of not training the way that everybody else is training. So Chile, what about this? These are some of those southern hemisphere countries. So these are the summer games.
Sure.
But yet it's winter.
Yep.
And what's that like to prepare for an athlete leaving winter and coming to summer?
Well, I can only speak from personal experience when I competed in triathlon world championships at an amateur level. I will say that right now. But we came out of an Australian winter to compete in Germany in September. And it was really hard. I mean, it's very hard to train for a sport like triathlon during the middle of winter. I was living in Canberra at the time.
Now, the People's Republic of China is the biggest team here at 414 athletes. Now, I found that it was really interesting, and this is some of what sport can do for the culture of a country, where for the longest time China had a very, very small contingent of athletes, and I think at one point they said that there actually weren't disabled people in China, which I think is a bit misleading. When you have 1 billion people, the math really doesn't work. But when they had the games, they decided that they were going to be the most competitive. China is probably the team to watch in Beijing. They won more medals than the U.S. and Great Britain combined.
Extraordinary.
They will be dominant. They've made their decision. They're going to be dominant. But it was all over the television. The Paralympics was all over the television. It was great to see, and I think that really is a lot of what we're talking about with this idea of being curious, with Stephen Hawking's idea of being curious. Maybe you'll see something that you didn't think you'd see otherwise. And in China, now they're seeing something that they didn't think they'd see otherwise, and they're seeing the most dominant team. So that's certainly open to competition at the moment. We'll see what happens.
But they are the favourites, really, to bring home the most medals at these games, these Paralympics, even though obviously Great Britain is the host nation and will have that home ground advantage.
Right. And you often see a tremendous uptick from the host country. And Great Britain might well have that uptick, and I'm sure they're looking to knock off the Chinese. They're the ones on the top of the hill right now.
Well, all will be revealed.
So go from 414 with the Republic of China to 58 athletes from Colombia, which is a fairly decent contingent, but at the same time doesn't really compare with the Chinese. And you get a variety of different support. You get a variety of different support from the countries throughout. Some of these countries are putting it together as best they can with local support. Some have governmental support. Some have major corporate support. But as we see, it's a tough challenge, and that certainly does not mean that some of these countries that are that have smaller contingents or have less support doesn't discount those athletes, because there certainly will be some of those athletes who can be the best in the world.
Absolutely, and in many ways it makes it even more impressive that they make it to compete at a world level despite having not as much support in their home country.
It really does.
You still have to, I mean, there's no discounting here. You still have to go through a qualification process for your region. So you've still got to be the best in your region.
You still have to be the best in the region, and in a lot of the sports you have to run qualifying standards just to be able to get into the events. So everybody here, the beauty of the Paralympics is it is the top of sport. It is the top of sport for everybody throughout the world. It is the most prepared that you're going to be. You're going to basically prepare to be at your best at this moment, and everybody's doing it. So that's the cool part. If you can win, you beat the best on the biggest stage when everybody's prepared the most. We're seeing Costa Rica coming through here. And it is kind of funny because the people sitting there in the stands who probably are primarily British seem like they are part of every country. As the country comes in, the country comes into the stadium, and they seem to give a little bit to every single country.
Absolutely.
Côte d'Ivoire, one of the African countries here. Great
pretty loud
uniforms.
Shirts there.
They are.
Croatia! That's great. Why not make a statement? Croatia.
And you know what? Those flags and those are heavy.
I'll bet.
He's given it all he has, but he's going to be tired by the time he's done with that.
By the time you've done a lap of the stadium.
But he's not feeling any of it right now, which is oftentimes exactly what you feel as an athlete, that you're out here and you have that kind of support from the audience, and you often don't feel the pain that you feel so much other times in your career.
One of my enduring memories from the Beijing Paralympics closing ceremony was when they handed a huge flag over to Boris Johnson, the London mayor, and the flag was about twice as tall as him on a pole, right. And he waved it with such enthusiasm and vigour, but it was like he was going in slow motion because it was so heavy and awkward. But back then, really set the tone for how excited they were to be hosting these games. And he's been a great ambassador for the event.
He has been a great ambassador for the event. And that's, I think, what everybody feels. What you feel as a spectator is very similar to what you feel as an athlete, because I think you live and die with the performances of the athletes, and it is such an emotional performance and a celebration of what's possible as a human being. So these victories, I think, are often shared victories where you as the audience are watching, we as the audience are watching, and we see a tremendous performance, we go, wow, like that's what we as human beings are capable of doing. And
Czech Republic.
Czech Republic coming in here. Nice to see their umbrella carrying